many people and pastors that are working with people in ministry almost on a weekly or even daily basis dealing with people that are facing crises or critical situations. However, it's interesting to note how often we interchangeably use the word crisis when what we really mean is critical situation. And so today, my hope is to be able to make the distinction between a crisis and a critical event. I think the very best definition that I have heard of a crisis is by Howard Stone. And he says it's an internal response to an external event. Internal response to an external event. He then goes on to identify about 4 different phases of how a crisis develops. The very first phase is there has to be a critical event or a precipitating event. That may be one event or it may be an accumulation of many events. After the event, the second phase is that the person that is facing or experiencing this critical event has to make an appraisal, or the perception of that person about the event has got to feature in determining if this actually does rise to the capacity of a crisis or not. If the person appraises or makes meaning of the event in a way that it fits something, a category that they are able to deal with, most likely the critical event is not going to rise to the capacity of a crisis. However, if the appraisal or the perception of the person of this particular event happens to be one that actually threatens their world of meaning or their world view, or what Janoff Bowman might call meaningful, benevolent world where the self is worthy, then most likely there is very high potential of this critical event becoming a crisis. But then there is the third stage that also the situation has to go through in order to be determined if it's a crisis or not. And this is the engagement of coping resources. This is the human thing that we do. When our world is threatened, we engage coping resources, which could range anywhere from support system, it could be our mental analytical capacity, it could be engaging religious or spiritual resources that help us through the situation. Those are all kind of coping resources. If we are able to engage our coping resources successfully and effectively to be able to give a meaning or to change the perception with which this particular event had threatened us, then we have been able to thwart what could have been a crisis. On the other hand, if we engage our coping resources and these coping resources fail to remove the threat that we have perceived due to the critical event, then this situation will rise to the capacity of a fully blown crisis. So what's the importance of having or making this distinction between the crisis and the critical event? One, if we do not make the distinction, most likely we are intervening using the full armor of crisis intervention in a situation that is simply a critical event. Second, when we do not make the distinction, we are bound to actually intervene in ways that may actually send the person whom we are hoping to help into a crisis where our goal was to get them out of a crisis. And that, when we intervene without making the distinction, most likely we are intervening from our own perception and not from the experience or the perception of the person that is actually experiencing this crisis. So you can see why it is so important to be able to make this distinction so that when we intervene or work with people, we are able to distinguish, are they in a crisis or are they simply facing a critical situation? And the very fourth and last item that I would like to say is when we do not make the distinction, what we may end up actually doing is disempowering the people from using their coping resources, because we have intervened too early using crisis intervention strategies for a situation where the person may very well be coping and not needing our intervention.